So Lavonne, welcome to Unusual Attitudes.
Thank you.
So my first question for everyone always is, who is Lavonne Monroe?
Who is Lavonne Monroe? Well, first things first, I'm a child of God. That is number one. That is who I strive to be, who I live for, whose I am. Those who are believers understand that statement. Outside of my spirituality, golly, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, caregiver as well with my parents. But then I'm a bit of a survivor. I'm definitely a different breed, I would call myself. I'm very, very resilient. I've had to come through a lot of things to get where I'm at. So there's a lot of level of resilience I believe that I've built up in me. So it's a very strong characteristic that I take with me literally with everything that I do.
Talk a little bit about, I love a story of perseverance, and sort of that, a lot of it has to do with how you find sort of an inner courage, to keep moving forward. And, how do you have the motivation to keep going, especially through really difficult times? And if you're willing to share, maybe share some of that experience, like what was a challenge for you? How did you find your resilience?
Yeah, I think now I'm an Army brat, so my dad served, and I almost feel like it probably started just because we moved every 3 years. So we've had to pick up and restart, pick up and restart, pick up and restart. And moving to another place, a new place where you're the new girl on campus or in the school setting, that's tough in itself. You literally get to a place where you just, build relationships, then boom, now you're up and moving and restarting. I think that's probably what started it. And then, just from a early on perspective, I met my husband in high school in Hawaii, and my sophomore year, his junior year. And, we started our family very early. And back then we made a key decision that I would put him through school. So I put him through school. And the goal was that I would always then, once he graduated, because unfortunately back then he could graduate and make more money as a male than I could as a woman. That was factual. And so I worked and put him through school, and then I was supposed to go back, but I never went back. So I had, my family, I have my boys. I've tried to go back to school a couple of times, a lot of times throughout the process, but I just jumped right into management very on. I've been leading teams since I was 21 years old. And I've managed people who were double my age, triple my age sometimes. And I think that's also right. So I've always been faced with some type of opposition. And to be very frank, failure is just not an option. I believe that I learn through the opportunities that maybe I haven't succeeded as much through. I don't call them failures. I call them opportunities for learning. And I've learned a lot over the years, and I've been presented with tons of different obstacles. Cliff, I've had a woman try to fight me at work. I've had Caucasian male call me a black bitch in the boardroom. I've been passed up for tons of jobs that I'm well overqualified for because I don't have a degree. So at the end of the day, there's just, in my mind, there isn't a no. It's just I have to figure out how to get there, and I just have to do it differently. So
I find it really interesting. You and I share a very similar background. My dad was in the Coast Guard, so I grew up in 14 states and 3 countries. We're sitting today on the campus of MIT in Boston, and this is one of my homes. This is actually what I call home. When my family's from Philadelphia, but when people say where you're from, I tell them I'm from Boston because this was the most influential place for me growing up.
Okay.
But what I found, and I want to go back to it because I think this is when you talk about that perseverance, the resilience, the ability, and I would say, I know you well enough at this point, your adaptability, into situations and is very similar to mine in that respect. And I think it is born out of, we're moving again, you got to make friends really fast, right? So, and part of that is like adapting to that environment. one of the things that I'd be interested to know is to see if it's similar to mine and similar to others, which is how quickly you tell your story. Because what I found was when I moved, I had about 2 weeks to tell my story and get the group of friends, because I was gone in 6 to 8 months. We knew we were moving again. Maybe didn't move that often, but we moved a lot.
Oh, wow.
Up to the age of about 14. But even if it's 2 or 3 years, I think you tend to find yourself telling your story. You get really good at telling your story to attract people to you, right? To make those friends. Did you find that was the case for you? And how did that translate, if it did, into your business life?
Right. I believe early on, especially when I was younger, obviously I struggled with that though. I think athletics have absolutely helped me with that. I played sports, so you almost automatically had a family, with the athletic family. As I got older, one of my survival traits was a chameleon. You're absolutely right. I just blended in. I didn't want to stand out, but I blended in very well. So I can be in any room. It doesn't matter the level, the types of people, demographics. I can blend in. And that was my survival tactic very early on. I've taken that into business in a similar fashion in regards to, I'll never forget my mentor early on told me that was actually the only way to survive corporate America as a Black woman was to blend in. You didn't want to stand out. You didn't want them to, unfortunately, you didn't want to be known at the table. And that was a survival tactic for a Black woman back then. Whereas now, absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. I walk into a room, I own who I am. I'm extremely confident in who I am. I can tell my story under 30 seconds. I can tell you my whole life story in 30 seconds if you want to know it. And I'm not ashamed of the differences in my path. I believe the differences in my path are the reason why I have success and are the reasons why, I am where I am, and I will continue to, keep on going and chart different paths. I'm very, very thoughtful around, what my children are witnessing and seeing. And there are different examples of success, and however you want to define it, because everybody kind of defines it differently, that I am mirroring that for them, that I am walking that for them, that I am talking that for them. That's extremely important to me. So it's not what other people think about me, it's the example that I'm giving for my children and that legacy that I want to establish in my family. And how I want it to be different, to be very frank, than what my upbringing was.
Yeah, I think I find that to be very refreshing, because I'm very similar. I have 2 younger kids, 5 and 8, and I find that at 54 years old, my life is really about how do I set them up for success. Yes. So I feel like, am I successful? I feel like I am wildly successful. And another thing we share is I never went to college. Like, I came out of a performing arts high school, went on tour as a musician. Then I figured I'd better figure out how to make some money and taught myself to be a graphic designer, then taught myself some engineering and opened my first company, and, and just sort of took these huge risks, like, because I didn't know any better, and maybe, I was unburdened, with not having much. We were very poor growing up. That's what happens when you're a military brat.
Yes.
You are not in the wealthy class.
No.
You're not even in the, my family, for years, from the time that I was 8 until I was 11 years old, Sunday was government cheese day.
In the brown box.
In the brown box.
Yes. And you had to slice it.
Yep.
Sometimes it got
was a big
pre-sliced.
block. Sometimes, and we my dad was a chef, so we used old piano wire to do the slicing. Yep. So we got really efficient with slicing cheese, but like everything was around, Sunday going to stand in a food line, and we lived in government housing because they were in the military. Yep. You live in government housing. Yep. So I never had a lot of material things, and I don't really care about material things. And I have nice things, right? No doubt. And I've been faulted, and maybe you have a similar experience. I've been faulted by people who judge how the environment that I am having my children grow up in. But my default response is, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to not have them live with me?
Mm-hmm.
Am I supposed to not show them that you can work hard and you can commit to things and life can get better just so that they have it worse and maybe have some of that character building that you and I had? There's other ways to build character.
Right.
And I think that's really the challenge you're talking about. How in this world do we maintain ourselves and our values, but still instill that in our children, especially our children, without having to force them to go through a harder path, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the toughest thing as a parent is that balance. And my husband and I talk about this all the time. We can't always come in and save them. I have 4 boys, all boys, and they range from the ages of 28 to 14. And they're all in different stages in their lives, right? And 3 of them are out of the house, and I just have the 14-year-old left. I find that parenting actually truly starts at like 18. Yeah. 18 to 30.
It's the truth.
Those are the years, because then it's life impacting. Then it's, potentially a legacy impact. Then it's potentially, me watching a train wreck. And do I allow the train wreck when my husband and I have the tools to stop the train? And that's the tough part, right? So that's the character building, right? And how much of that do we allow that to happen? How much of that do we come in and save, or do we help and guide? I think that's just the biggest golden rule of parenting, that, to be very frank, all of us are going to have different solutions too. And every child is different with what they need and what their paths are. And no matter how much the household is the same, let's be real, every single one of our children experienced us as different. Because when I had my first child at 20, compared to having my last child, there's a different Lavonne, right? There's a different of my husband. Our maturity levels, our knowledge has changed. So we don't parent the same. So every child is then raised differently and experiences us differently. So the dynamic is still different. So, man, I think that's just my biggest thing is, okay, Lavonne, right? How can they learn lessons through me? Because let's be real, they don't come to us for advice anymore. They're over that, right? They've heard us too long. So how can I then just show, right? How can I show? And how can I be there for them when they do decide to pick up the phone and ask questions? How do I make sure that my relationship with them is open enough and safe enough to have those open conversations where they don't feel judged, and things like that, right? So no matter how far in the business world I get, doesn't matter. I'm still mom. I am, whoever you need me to be. I'm here to support you. I am who I am for them, actually. So everything that I'm driving to do is for my kids.
And isn't that, I think you get to that point, especially with your kids, where that their willingness to engage you in anything didn't happen at 18 or 25 or 28 at this point.
Yeah.
That started when they were 4, 5 years old. And so this is a very, very long journey of parenthood where we're also learning. I had my first son, I was 23, when my son Kyle was born. He's no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. But, then I became a new father, at 46 years old. I became a father again. And then again at 49, I became a father again. And I look at those experiences of being a father at 23 and what Kyle taught me about. He's still my best teacher.
Yes.
And whether he is here or not, he would still be my best teacher. As I'm sure your oldest is probably your best teacher.
Yes.
Right? Especially your first, because you make so many mistakes.
Yes, I have to apologize to him.
Yeah.
I've you're scrolling Instagram and TikTok, and they have those reels that come through saying, send this to your firstborn, and it's an apology. Because he was our guinea pig. We didn't know anything. And then fortunately and unfortunately, we took things from our parents in our childhoods, whether positive or negative, but then that's what we created, right? Yeah. So when we were young, we made some I will not or I will never statements to ourselves and commitments to ourselves around how we were going to parent, whether those were right or wrong. Yeah. We had a definition in our mind. And so then with the next one, I got better, right? I got better. I got better. And so now as an adult with my 3 oldest, it's just, how can I help? Or I'm here to help if and when you need it, right? Funny story, Cliff, I lead talent acquisition, and my eldest was doing his resume for the first time. So I'm in talent acquisition. My husband's in HR. So
surrounded by it.
Yeah. Okay. Surrounded by it. I don't even know if Maine remembers this, but I do vividly. And so he goes out to get his first job. He's building his resume. He paid some random company to do his resume. And I'm like,
you have all that talent at home.
Right? And you went out and paid and it was some service, I don't know, to do his resume. And I'm just like, we're right here. But you know what? Okay. You want to do it on your own. Okay, great. We will go for that. And when you want me to look at it, I'm here. So I just have to be careful. I don't just throw myself in there.
Coming over the top.
Yeah.
A little too overbearing.
Absolutely.
How has your journey as a parent translated into your journey as a leader in organizations? Because I would think that they parallel themselves. I think they would have to.
They do. I put my team first at all times. They are the reasons why I'm here. To be very frank, I can't be here without them. And there is no me and Lavonne success without a whole plethora of a team that's killing themselves to, hit deadlines and meet KPIs and everything else. So I pride myself on being very pragmatic. I do my best to step back and be like, okay, this is not normal behavior. So what else could be going on? So I really try to analyze if there are personal dynamics that's going to impact work or impact results or things like that. So the way that I lead is very sympathetic, I would say, to an extent though, right? Because performance is performance at the end of the day. But I'm very fair in those regards. And I try to analyze and sometimes overanalyze my fairness across the board. But to be very frank, Cliff, I manage and lead the way that I would want to be led. I've had some of the worst bosses, right? Some of the worst bosses. I've been told to make a decision between my job and my family. Literally, quote unquote, you have to make a decision between your job or your kid. My kid was sick. I was a young mom. I was working. My husband was in school. I had to choose my job because we had to feed my kid. So I couldn't stay home with my kid. So there's a lot of those key moments that stood out for me that unfortunately I didn't have empathetic leaders at that time that really drive the way that I lead now.
When you make that decision, because clearly it still sticks with you, you tell the story. And I'm sure,
like it was yesterday.
I'm sure you remember it. You probably remember where you were standing when it happened, the smell in the room, right? Yeah. And you have this visceral emotional reaction to it. I'm certain. If you're being the parent you are, being the leader that you are, how do you contextualize that for someone who's going through that experience right now?
So I've actually been asked this question before, and unfortunately it is still situational. Because if you're in a position where you can make the right decision and you can choose your family and everything else, then go for it. I was not in the position. If I walked out of that job, my son wasn't eating by Friday.
Right.
So back then, unfortunately, I had to take a lot of crap in order just to make sure that, my kids were eating and that we were paying our bills and that we didn't end up back in my parents' house, right, at the end of the day. So I would say, now, though, there are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of companies out there. We can hold them accountable. Now you can report. And I didn't feel safe enough.
At least here in the United States.
At least here in the U.S., yes. You can report. I didn't feel safe enough to do that. I didn't have, to be honest, my mom and my dad were not corporate America, employees. So I didn't have mom and dad to go to for advice on how to navigate corporate America. So I just had to figure it out. And a lot of it I just had to take. And during me just taking it on the chin and moving on, trust me, I was building. I was building on, okay, this is who I don't want to be as a leader. And I'm going to prove everybody wrong. So it just fueled my fire.
Yeah, there's a fire there. And I think part of my point in asking the question is as my children grow up, they're going to run into this situation. Certainly my oldest son did, and we experienced it with him in a number of situations, especially through high school, with bullying and some other situations. Yes. And I'm not trying to justify any of those experiences, because there are those out there that would say, well, that's what made you stronger. Well, let me tell you something, and I'm sure that you would agree with this. I didn't need that to make me stronger.
You did not.
Right? You just proved something only about you. Right. And who I don't want to be around, but it didn't really affect me. Like, I don't need to be a stronger person sitting in a room. You talk about it in a awful experience of someone using your race, your gender against you, which is the weakest form of an argument, right?
Yes.
And that person, I'm certain, you hope they would regret it, but at the very least, you can look back at that and go, I'm not that person. It doesn't justify the behavior, but there are times when we have to experience things, good or bad. We have to, and finding the right context. How do you help, and what advice would you give to someone to say, okay, you've just had this terrible experience. Maybe you were or weren't in a position, I can quit the job or I have to stay, right? But people will have this guilt about it. Either direction, you'll have guilt. I quit, great. I put my family at risk. I put myself at risk. I couldn't quit. I stayed. Now I feel like I'm being stepped on, right? But, help contextualize that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the key thing, Cliff, is I never once called it strength, right? At the end of the day, I never once called it strength. I think it's important for people to understand that experiencing your emotions and allowing the regrets, allowing the anger, allowing that to fuel whatever your next action plans are going to be, that's strength. And that's what I would tell, right? Somebody is, whatever your decision has to be at that moment, whether it's the one you want or not, whatever it is, just make sure that you are then learning from that situation, and then you turn that situation to something that will improve, or will then, help justify the decision at the end of the day. So, I couldn't make that decision back then, right? But I definitely can make the decision now. I couldn't make the decision back then, but I can ensure that I can help my children who, whether it's financially, spiritually, whatever, that they can then make that decision now. And then, unfortunately, and I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but I think just the competitive nature in me, it's like the one thing you don't ever want to do to me is tell me I can't do something, or try to push me up against a wall. I come out blazing. So all of those key moments just fueled my plan then. And to be very frank, I said to myself, I will never allow any. Unfortunately, I've only had a lot of male leaders until I've gotten into senior leadership. I will never allow a male leader to tell me what my peak is. I will never allow a male leader to dim my light. Even if my light has to be dimmed for that particular moment, because I'm, working on my life stuff, there will be a moment where you will not be able to put out my light. And that's what drives me. So it keeps me going. So it may not be right then in that moment that you're going to understand the why behind that particular obstacle, but the why behind that obstacle will show up, whether it's 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the why you went through that is going to show up. Yeah.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Lavonne, thank you for sharing.
No, thank you. This is great, Cliff.
Thanks.